Well, welcome everyone to Thriving in Business and Life. I'm Christopher Harding.
And I am Will Wilkinson.
And we've got a wonderful guest with us today, Dan Rockwell, the author of a book called Vagrant. But he's a wonderful author, but he's so much more than an author. He's I don't know, what would you call him, Will? Almost like a wise man in many ways.
Well, he coaches leaders, and what I think everyone's going to discover in the conversation with Dan is that he's extremely practical. Like what he says is very actionable. I love that with our guests, where our viewers, our listeners can take things away to act on, and Dan delivers.
Absolutely. So welcome.
Thank you.
Love your shirt there, Dan. You're looking very tropical.
That's it's summertime, baby.
Yes. Well, yeah, good to connect with you. My partner, Will Wilkinson, here is sitting in the forest in Ashland, Oregon, and I'm parked in Prescott, Arizona. Where are you calling in from, Dan?
Central Pennsylvania.
I think you were getting some bad air down from Canada. Was that reaching you?
Oh, yes. Yeah. It's a hazy, smoky. Sometimes you can even you get the smell of smoke in the air. Absolutely.
That's why Dan's wearing his tropical shirt. He's imagining that he's in Hawaii or somewhere where there's clear air.
Well, as a Canadian, Dan, I apologize to you on behalf of our country.
Well, thank you. I've been looking forward to somebody apologizing and like, who's going to hold those damn Canadians accountable?
I'm sorry. And as you know, Canadians are overly apologetic, so I'll repeat it. I'm sorry.
So we'll just let our listeners and viewers know you've written this wonderful new book called Vagrant, and we'll get into that in just a minute. You're also the ongoing author, prolific author, may I add, of leadershipfreak.blog, which is really just lots of tasty, interesting pieces on there.
Thank you.
And, I just first of all, before we get into those details, tell us a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and what the heck, how did you start doing this kind of amazing writing?
I started writing Leadership Freak about 12 years ago, and I had no idea what I was doing. I just decided to do it. I had evaluated my life. I had a midlife crisis. I think I've had many of them. I think we all need to have lots of midlife crises, Thankfully, I didn't unbutton my shirt down to my navel, get a gold chain, a 2-seat car, and divorce my wife. But I did go through that evaluation time, and I felt like, you got more in you, which I think is very typical when we go through these cycles. I think it happens about every 10 years, where you're saying, I think I have more in me. What am I going to do about that? So anyway, I started writing. I made a commitment to myself to write 5 days a week for a year to see if it got traction. And that was 12 years ago. And by about a month and a half, there were 60 countries or so represented in the subscriber list. And I started getting, people saying, publishers saying, could we send our book to you? The first one came from Harvard Press. And I started thinking like, well, maybe there's something to it. And so I just kept writing. I've been giving it away for 12 years. And it led to so many, it changed our lives. I'm just so thankful for the opportunity to do that.
You've been out speaking a lot too, right? You're kind of quite a notable speaker on the corporate circuit, if I understand correctly.
Yes, I do travel and speak. I shouldn't say that. I stopped traveling a year ago, last August. So I'm not, frankly, I don't care if I ever get on another airplane. I love arriving. You know what I'm saying?
We've got to figure that part out, Dan. If only we could just transport ourselves, right?
Yes. Yeah, I'm a Trekkie.
Can I just jump back and make a comment on your first comment? Just appreciation, really, because it seems what you did is what I notice a number of people doing is you led with your contribution. You started writing, you're giving it away, and it sounds like you weren't really intent on gaining anything from that. It was just your service, your value, giving value into the world. And then your life changed and all this stuff arrived because of that. I just wanted to make a note of that because I admire that. It's something I do myself. And I notice a lot of servant leaders do that. They start with what they can contribute, not with what they can get.
Yes. Well, thanks for noticing that and being a good Canadian. I think you probably would get that. So, and it's the truth of it. A year and a half in, I got my first invitation to speak, and I came home that day. I was working at a local Penn State affiliate, and I came home that day and I said to my wife, I said, "We can make money doing this," and we both laughed. And I've traveled all over and even overseas to speak. So the whole thing changed our lives. But I would say this, Will, to your comment, I still get a little touchy when people say, "How's your business?" Because I don't think of it as a business. Thankfully, my wife is a CPA. She can handle all the, financial businessy kind of things. I don't even know what a funnel is for sure on the internet. You're trying to funnel I don't sell products that much, I don't do any of that stuff. It offends me a little bit because I don't have a business, but honestly, it changed our lives. And, today I coach leaders and I'm able to make money doing that, but it was never the goal. Never. I had no idea.
I want to segue from there over to this new book you have coming out. When is the release date, Dan?
September 19th.
September 19th. Yeah. So we'll circulate this again online right before the release as well. The book is called Vagrant. And yes. I learned something immediately right away about the word vagrant and its ornithological origins, which to me was utterly fascinating. I mean, I've been thinking about it ever since I read it. So share with us, first of all, just that, for everybody who doesn't know, which may be many, what does vagrant mean?
Vagrant is a bird that's really been blown off course out of its native habitat. And so, it's like, and this happens to us. That's the whole idea of the vagrant is here's a person who has been blown off course. In the case of Bob in the story, he doesn't even realize it. He doesn't even know, and he just continues to tumble downward, doing things that are self-defeating. He's a talented person, but he just has engaged in behaviors that don't serve him or others well. And
I thought of it in a way as being a wonderful story of the journey of cluelessness and and where it can lead, and how there can be redemption in it. But I guess why that struck me so much was just the realization of how often, certainly I, and I'm sure many of us, are utterly clueless about the impact or how we're coming off with other people.
Yeah, so true. I've been thinking about it myself a lot. I think tomorrow I'm going to post my list of self-defeating behaviors that I've engaged in, at least, and it's so long it would break my 300-word limit. So I'm going to have to narrow it down to the biggest ones. But who has not in life woken up someday saying, this isn't working, and realize the problem isn't out there at all. The problem is in here. It's in me. It's, it's stuff that I'm doing, and we do it sincerely. We do it honestly. I think usually not maliciously, but we do it, and we bear the consequences for it.
Well, I've been looking forward to asking you about one of your blogs which relates to this. There's the one on focus, because when we see a person going off track or look at ourselves, to me, it's a lack of course correction. There's that well-known fact about airplanes off course 80 or 90% of the time, They just keep course correcting. They end up at their destination. Well, there's a mechanism for course correction built in to that technology. It seems in human lives, many of us lose touch with the capacity to course correct. And I thought your blog on focus was brilliant about just deliberately not paying attention to certain things because they would take you off course. So I've been looking forward to asking you to elaborate on that a little bit more, the whole mechanism of focus and course correction.
Yeah, wonderful question, Will. I appreciate the question. And I think we get, I'll speak for myself, but I think we get so absorbed in what we want to accomplish that we lose sight of things. And we don't even realize that we're going off course. The blog post, the illustration that caught my imagination was a runner in Georgia who had followed the escort motorcycle off the course. At the end of the race, I've never seen an escort motorcycle go across a finish line. They always pull off right before. And I mean, you can see the finish line, and she's so focused on the wrong thing, but, you know, passionate and energetic and pouring herself into it, that she just runs off the course. She was in first. She ended up, as she realized quickly, you can see her in the video. It's so wonderful. She's realizes it. You don't see her turn around, but she appears back on camera running like nuts after, 10K. And she ends up in third place and not first. It's a tragedy. To me, it's a tragedy. So the mechanisms for course correction, when you think about the Vagrant and, that story, the idea that we're striving for is to help people create structured self-reflection. Notice what's going on around you. And when I say structured, I kind of bristle a bit at like, let's sit under a tree and contemplate the meaning of life. Let's, hum, and no offense to any of meditation is proven to be useful for people. I don't mean to make fun of that. I'm just saying that we need some structure, especially leaders, especially managers. We need some structure in our self-reflection. And honestly, just to do it is one of the big things on course correction. So I'll ask young leaders that I work with, tell me about your self-reflection practice. And they look at me like cows look at a new gate. It's like, what's that? So, but I really believe in a structured system. And so at the end of the book, it gives you some examples of that to help. So I think self-reflection, I would say, is one way, Will, to maintain course correction, but don't do it in isolation, because our ability to deceive ourselves is profound.
I think your book gives some really great examples of that, of how Bob, the main character, continues down this path of self-deception, but he has some touch points along the way, people who are giving him feedback, which always seems to surprise him, which is not surprising in and of itself. I remember some of the feedback I've received in the past where I was startled that I thought I was coming across in one way and other people were perceiving me in a very different way. And I thought that was really instructive just in the story itself, is that these touch points along the way where he was getting reflection. So to your point, my self-reflection could be very delusional if I'm not getting outside input.
Exactly. And I think that's part of what I'm excited about in the book. I mean, I love the story, that whole thing, but at the end, when you encourage a reader to say, look, self-reflection in isolation leads to deception, self-deception, and we need to include others. We need to talk through how we're coming across, because like you said, we've all received that feedback. I had people tell me, Dan, you're pushy. It's like, and thank goodness they told me. I'm not pushing. I'm a teddy bear, right? My adult daughter told me one day, she said, I think you like to scare people. It's like, wow. Aye.
Isn't that amazing how, wow, go ahead, Will.
Well, I'm just remembering, I'm a movie buff, and often I reference films, and in The Bridge Over the River Kwai, if you can recall that old film, Alec Guinness's character, the Colonel, very proud of the bridge he's built, and suddenly realizes in the midst of a firefight that his bridge is bringing a train with munitions to kill their own men. Takes off his hat and he goes, "Oh my God, what have I done?" Drops the hat, falls in the plunger, blows up the bridge. He wasn't doing any self-reflection relative to gaining input from anyone else. He was siloed in his own pride. Sure, he was doing the right thing, and it took, bullets over his head, etc., to wake him up. Sadly, that's often the case, is that it takes a real, catastrophe to get us out of our blinders so that we can see, the implications of what we're doing.
Yeah. Wow. So true. You bring up my favorite topic in the world, which is humility. It's the topic I love to talk about, but know very little about. And actually, I have several books in my mind, and I'm working on one right now that follows up the Vagrant. But the first book that really came to mind, I'll never forget. It was a beautiful summer day in Pennsylvania. I walked out of my office. My wife was on the back deck. The umbrellas were up. It was sunny. It was beautiful. And I walked out with a stunning announcement. I want to write a book on humility. And she burst into laughter.
Well, they always say, teach what you need to learn about, right? So
that would be like me writing a book on yoga.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the first line of my book on humility is, they say write books about things you know about. I'm doing the opposite.
Right. Well, there's something you described. So just for our viewers and listeners, this wonderful story, which, wow, I mean, it's just such a story. And by the way, there's elements of that story that are so hauntingly familiar to me, Dan. I mean, another time I could share with you some parallels. But what was really interesting is at the end, you have this rich section for people to be able to go through and get some real value to follow up on the lessons that are shown in this story. And one of the things you talked about, and it circles back to what you were talking about earlier, is the difference between self-reflection and self-absorption. And I thought it'd be interesting to have you just to say a little more about that, because there's such a fine line there, right? And once you cross over, you're in an entirely different dimension.
Yeah, it's true. And I think self-absorption is a little more natural to some of us. I won't say everybody, but I think, I wake up, I think about myself. I think about how I'm coming across. I think about what I want to get done, and so I write for leaders and managers, and I think about, in that world, you have to think beyond yourself. You have to think about your impact on others. And you're right. I think it's a delicate situation, because I don't encourage, you don't want to encourage people to be absorbed with themselves. You want to encourage them to self-reflect. But I think what makes it better, or maybe useful, is that self-reflection has a goal, and that is systematic. That there are certain questions that you're going to ask yourself. So you think of, it guides you toward a focus that obviously begins with who you are and bringing your best self to the world. But then it goes back to, as you said at the beginning, contribution. What does contribution look like? What can I give more than what can I get? So I was
just going to say, you list some of those kind of questions or process of, you talk about structured self-reflection. Maybe share with us a little bit about some of the questions that would be helpful for people to self-reflect on, so that they don't fall into the trap of self-absorption.
One is, at the end of the day, what did I set out to do? And did I accomplish that? And the did I is a yes or no question, which is probably not the best, but how well did I accomplish that? What would I like to do differently tomorrow? How did people respond to me today? Oh, and I love these questions that deal with personal energy. You know, what were you doing when you lost track of time? What were you doing when your energy went up? And as a leader, thinking about what were the people on my team doing when their eyes went bright, you know, and how can I get them? But that involves self-knowledge and the willingness to monitor your own energy and to monitor the energy of others. But those are some of the, and I just am committed to this idea, Christopher, that is it Chris or Christopher? What
you call me whatever you want, Dan.
Yeah, call me
Fine
Al.
with these. Chris is fine.
I'm committed to the idea that you need to reflect in ways that connect with your goal for yourself, with your vision, with your values, so that you can keep in touch with them. Because over and over again, leaders are getting lost in work. And I can tell you for certain, after a few years of that, they're totally drained. They end up at the end of their rope. They don't know what they want to do. They're struggling just to do their day-to-day stuff, and they hate it. They just hate it.
Well, I'm just curious about your integration process. So I do the self-reflection at the end of the day, and I look back and I think, well, in that meeting, I got a little impatient. I was frustrated when somebody kept talking forever and didn't get to the point. Okay, so I'm being honest, maybe even being humble. And what do I do with that so that I don't repeat the same behavior tomorrow?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And here's a thought about it. And that is, this goes back to inviting others in, which I think is something that it takes us a long time in life to get comfortable with. You know, inviting people into your life. I encourage leaders, once they realize that they're engaging in these self-defeating behaviors, to invite people in. I think, for example, in your situation where you think about, I didn't run that meeting well. You know, I was cutting people off. I was interrupting. I was impatient. Is to go to a couple of your trusted colleagues and say, hey, I just want to mention something to you. I'm noticing this in myself. I'm working on, overcoming this. And you can begin this way, is just say, could you do me a favor? In this meeting, would you notice when you think maybe I'm doing something that takes me down the wrong path, or the path I don't want to go down? And could you also let me know the things I'm doing that, reflect, yes, you're going in the direction you want to go. And then could we just have a debrief after this meeting, just like 5 minutes? So you get some feedback very quickly. It springs out of this awareness that you're doing things that aren't really working for you or others, but bringing the outside in is one way. And the side benefit of this, Will, is that when you start including others in serious self-development, it encourages and challenges them to do the same thing. Right. And that's a great way to help your people on your team get better too.
Well, and you just used the word team. I mean, suddenly you're playing as a team rather than siloed in your individual positions. Thank you. I'm fireworks going off here, underlining this 3 times. Get out of ourselves and work as a team. Thank you.
Yeah, Dan, you used a term in your description there that I thought was really interesting. You talked about inviting people in to your life. So that whole idea of inviting people in is interesting, because so many times, and I think this is the challenge leaders have. We do a lot of work with leaders as well, coaching and facilitating and so forth. And a lot of times what we find is they have a myth that a strong leader does it on their own, that a strong leader doesn't show their weaknesses, because then people will go for your throat or whatever the illusion is there. But how you described that process, I thought was so so wonderful, because the other side benefit that's going on there is the person you're doing that with, as you kind of suggested, is basically seeing something modeled that they can then start doing. It creates self-awareness for them. It creates permission for them to be self-reflective and to invite other people in. And I think, that leading by the example of being vulnerable is really so important.
Wow, you picked up on something that is so essential, right? That if people are going to trust us, we have to be real. We have to be vulnerable. We have to be people who say, "Well, I'm not sure of that. I don't know the answer. We'll figure it out. Give me some time." You know what I mean? There has to be some honesty, some transparency, some vulnerability. Yesterday, I had a conversation with a coaching client, and he's going to be out of his company in 2.5 years. He has 7 leaders who report to him. He says, when they have a big problem, they call me. When they have a serious employee issue, they call me. When they have some sort of conflict with another colleague, they call me. I'm their go-to person. I need to teach them how to find their go-to team so that they're not, sure, there are some things I need to be involved in, but they need a go-to team. I asked him this question. I said, let me ask you, who's on your go-to team? He said, well, Dan, people ask me that a lot. And the first thing I say is I have a coach. And then the next thing I say, and he gave another person's name who was inside the company. Then he said, oh yeah, there's this guy and he has the same position as me. And we talk very frequently. And I said, how'd you meet him? He said, oh, at a show. Then he said, there's another person. And then there's this other person who is 90, and he's the son of the founder of our business, and he's still on the board. I take dinner to he and his wife. My wife and I go over once a month. We take dinner with us, and he's one of my go-to people. I said, wow, that's, and then he said, I'm just realizing I'm in meetings and people ask a question and I'm not sure of the answer. And I'll say, oh, just a minute. And I dial my phone. I dial somebody and put them on speakerphone. And we'll say, we're working on this thing right now. And I thought you might have something, that you could add to the conversation. So he has a whole go-to team around him already. And so obviously as a coach, what's the next question? What are you going to do to help your team? And he already knows, right? Well, man, I'll take some of them to shows with the goal. They're going to go to the show with the goal of huddling up after it's all over and saying, who are the 5 people you met who might become go-to people for you? Why do you say that? In other words, get your own team of go-to people. But oh my goodness, Chris, you are so right. I don't know. Where would we be if we could learn this sooner and let people into our lives?
Yeah, so true. There was just one quick reflection as you were saying that. I had the pleasure of bringing on board a guy who was initially a consultant, was in the film and television industry, and he'd worked for a number of very high-profile established companies, and I had him come in as a consultant. Eventually hired him as our executive VP. And I remember after we finished a meeting one time, it was at a studio or a network, and we were walking out to the car and he stopped me. He didn't just say it in passing, he literally stopped me so that we were facing each other. And he said, I want you to know something. You're a very smart guy, but you don't have to know everything. It's totally all right to say, I don't know. Let me get back to you. And I realized as a young leader, I was under the myth that I had to act like I knew the answer to everything. And that was such a moment that clearly, is stuck with me this whole time.
Yes. It's such a great story. And I think we show up thinking we have to have all the answers. I actually asked Mark Miller. He just retired from Chick-fil-A at the end of June. He was the VP of high performance leadership. And I said, if you could talk to your younger self, what would you say to your younger self? He said, I would say, stop pressuring yourself to have all the answers. It's so much stress, right? It's so much pressure. Find answers with people, talk to people who know more than you do. It's like, no, those young fellas, and I know, I mean, we have to prove how much we know.
Yeah. That's the thing, isn't it? I mean, really, it's based out of an insecurity and a misunderstanding. Yeah, go ahead, Will.
Well, I'm a writer as well, and I was just co-authoring a book with a businessman of South Carolina, and he described his journey from thinking that he was always the smartest guy in the room to assuming that he was the dumbest person in the room. And then he needed everybody else in that room to help him understand what he was blind to seeing. And that I thought was just a brilliant idea. Go into the room, assume you're the dumbest, and you need help from everybody.
Yeah, it's what a great, freeing, energizing. What am I going to learn today? I like to think, if you're the smartest person at the table, you're at the wrong table.
Right. Yeah, that's almost like Groucho Marx. I wouldn't belong to any club that allowed me as a member. Yeah, go ahead, Will.
Dan, I'm just curious to ask you, given what you're doing with leaders, what are the trends you're seeing? Because for those who rely on news, it's mostly bad. And you think the world is going to hell in a handbucket. I'm sure you have a different perspective, and I'd love to hear you speak a little bit about the positive trends you see in leadership.
Yes. Well, I work with people who are high performers who want to do well. So I do have that wonderful opportunity. If you have a problem person, I'm probably not your guy. You know what I mean? Now, don't get me wrong. I work with leaders who have struggles and problems, but they're all high performers. I love them all. I respect them all. And they're just fantastic. What you would expect, and what I do see, is learning how to navigate the self-care movement. A lot of talk about self-care in leadership and in business. And what does that mean? How do we have self-care? There is a heightened interest in both, I think, in some of the articles I'm reading and in books and in leadership about middle managers, how to really equip them well. So because the success of a company depends on the people in the middle. Because they are in the middle. They're central to everything. They're trying to lead up, they're leading down, they're leading sideways. They have an extremely complicated and high pressure sort of role to play. So I'm seeing that. I have to tell you. So one of the guys I work with said, I'm trying to figure out how to go home, let everybody know they can go home. You know what I mean? Go home at 5 o'clock, go home at 6 o'clock, be home for dinner. The world's going to go on without you. Everybody's like, they're working very hard. And I just feel like that kind of stuff that's going on around self-care, back to the self-care thing, is interesting. I just cringe at this whole self-care as an end in itself. And, I'm so busy and and there's this sort of, to me, I'm a victim mentality that's coming along with this self-care that's like just repulsive. But self-care so that you can contribute in a better way makes a world of sense to me.
Yeah.
Well, the way that I've constellated that myself, going back to your comment about meditation and so forth, is that, meditation is wonderful. It's an internal process. Then mindfulness is developed as, paying attention to your senses. I think there's a third step, which I call activation. What can I contribute? So I'm self-caring for myself, not stressed out, paying attention to what's going on around me. Now, what can I give that makes this better?
Yes. Will, what is it about you that you love this? What are we going to do about it? You love this, so we're going to do self-care. Okay. So what? What is it about you?
Well, thank you. I'd say it goes back to my deep disappointment in myself for believing Timothy Leary when he said, turn on, drop out. And I did. And I have some guilt, frankly, about that. As a baby boomer, I think that I really failed future generations by opting out. And, I was a hippie in the 60s, 70s, and so forth. Well, I now reframe that: tune in, turn on, not drugs, turn on some other way, and then engage. And so I feel for the rest of my life, I'll be doing my second chance. I have a second chance to contribute to the world in ways that I didn't do in my 20s, 30s, 40s. I dropped out. And I think I speak for many people my age who are kind of waking up and going, geez, I could have gone a different road. And now I have a chance to write that and do something about it. So I think that's probably it.
I just opened up my Kindle because Tom Rath wrote this little ebook for Amazon only, for Kindle only. And for me, because I'm committed to brevity and clarity, I want to be as brief as possible without becoming nonsensical. And his first two sentences: life is not about you, period. It is about what you do for others.
Wow. Yeah, that's a motto right there, isn't it?
Oh.
Well, that's beautiful. And we're circling in, rounding up on our last few minutes here. First of all, I just want to thank you for writing the book. I do have to ask you the question, were you in any way a person in the story that you wrote about?
Well, Bob, the main character, does all kinds of self-defeating things. And, whether it's, yes, the short answer is yes. Showing up to convince people I'm right. I did that when I was younger. Showing up to convince instead of to learn and listen. That's there. Bob is told in the story by someone who says, you're just loud, Bob. And what is that? That's pushy. You're just a loud person. And so, thanks for asking it. And it is a little bit vulnerable when people start to think about, I wonder how much of this story is actually Dan's story.
Yeah, well, I just encourage everyone who's listening and watching to watch for the book Vagrant, which is coming out September 19th. Phenomenal story. And in the meantime, while you're waiting for that, please go to leadershipfreak.blog. I think I got that URL correctly, and read the gems and the treasures that are there, because every one of them gives you something to reflect on.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. And I'm so honored that you would take some time to talk to me about this story and just about leadership in general. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
And I've wanted to thank you, Dan, and reflect back on a comment you made about humility. And you were being very, honest and vulnerable there. I think you're more humble than you may believe, because my experience of you and what I'll remember from this podcast isn't, you've made some brilliant comments, but what I think I will dominantly remember is your humility. So thank you for that.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I'll try not to be proud of hearing that statement.
Oh, that's classic. That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much, Dan. We'll keep you posted when this goes up, which will be next week.
Yeah, please do.
All right. Have a great rest of your week.
All right, you too.